The great chamber of the Galactic Council fell silent as the holographic display flickered to life. 12 species sat in their designated seats, their eyes fixed on the rotating image of a blue and green planet that hung in the center of the room. The planet looked peaceful from this distance, with white clouds swirling across its surface and vast oceans reflecting the light of its yellow sun. But every diplomat in that chamber knew the truth about this world. High Chancellor, a towering figure with gray skin and 4 arms, rose from his seat at the head of the council. His voice was deep and carried the weight of centuries of leadership. We have gathered today to discuss a matter of grave concern. Our long-range sensors have detected something on planet XR7 that should not exist. A murmur spread through the chamber. Planet XR7 was legendary among spacefaring species, but not for good reasons. It was classified as a Class 15, the highest danger rating in the Galactic Registry. No species had ever survived on its surface for more than a few hours. The planet was a death sentence wrapped in beautiful colors. Scholar, a small creature covered in soft blue fur, stood up from the delegation. Her large eyes blinked rapidly as she activated her data pad. I have studied the sensor readings myself, and I must admit that I do not understand what I am seeing. The planet has crushing gravity, nearly 3 times the standard. Its atmosphere contains a corrosive gas called oxygen at dangerous levels. The surface is covered with predators, extreme weather, and microbial life that attacks any foreign biology within minutes. She paused and took a breath before continuing. And yet our sensors show artificial structures on the surface, buildings, roads, organized settlements with thousands of life signs. Commander, a reptilian officer from the military, slammed his fist on the table. Impossible. Nothing can survive on a Class 15 world. Your sensors must be broken. I have checked them 17 times, replied calmly. They are functioning correctly. Something is living on that planet, something intelligent. The chamber erupted into chaos. Diplomats shouted over each other, some demanding immediate quarantine of the planet while others called for military intervention. High Chancellor raised all 4 of his arms and called for silence. There is more, he said quietly, and his tone made everyone stop talking immediately. We have identified the species living on that world, or rather we believe we have. He gestured to the holographic display, and the image of the planet was replaced by an old archive file. The file showed a bipedal creature with soft skin, 2 arms, 2 legs, and forward-facing eyes. These are humans, a species that disappeared from galactic records over 300 years ago. Ambassador, a tall and elegant being from the species, leaned forward in his seat. His silver scales caught the light as he studied the ancient image. I remember the stories about humans. They were considered dangerous and unstable. The previous council voted to restrict their movement and limit their access to galactic technology. They left shortly after that vote, confirmed. They simply vanished from all known space. We assumed they had died out, unable to survive without galactic support. He gestured back to the planet. It appears we were wrong. They did not die. They went home. The word hung in the air like a weight. Home. This was the human, the place where their species had evolved and grown before reaching for the stars. And somehow, against all logic and reason, they had returned to it and survived. Stood up slowly. I volunteer to lead a diplomatic expedition to the surface. If humans still exist, we must make contact with them. We must understand how they have accomplished this impossible thing. Commander made a sound of disbelief. You would throw away your life for curiosity. That planet will kill you before you even reach the ground. Perhaps, admitted, but I have studied human history in the archives. They were not monsters despite what the old council believed. They were simply different from us. Stronger, more adaptable. If there is any chance of reopening relations with them, we must take it. High Chancellor considered this for a long moment. The chamber was silent as everyone waited for his decision. Finally, he nodded. Very well. Ambassador will lead the expedition. Commander, you will provide military escort with a small team. Scholar, you will accompany them to study the human biology and technology. Opened his mouth to protest, but a look from silenced him. The commander knew better than to argue with the High Chancellor directly. 3 days later, the diplomatic vessel Eternal Vigilance dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the XR7 system. The planet hung before them, beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Stood on the bridge, his hands clasped behind his back as he studied the world that had haunted galactic nightmares for centuries. Beginning atmospheric scans, reported from her station. Her voice trembled slightly. Oxygen levels are at 21%, nitrogen at 78%. Surface temperature ranges from extreme cold to extreme heat depending on location. Gravity is confirmed at 2.8 times galactic standard. And the settlements, asked. Pulled up the data on the main screen. Dozens of red dots appeared across the planet's surface, each one representing a cluster of life signs. Confirmed, there are humans down there, thousands of them, maybe more. Stood in the corner of the bridge, his arms crossed and his expression grim. This is madness. Even with our best environmental suits, we will not last more than a few hours on that surface. Then we must make those hours count, replied. As they prepared to enter orbit, a strange sound came through the ship's communication array. At first, it was just static and noise, but then it resolved into something recognizable. Music. Human music, with instruments and voices singing in a language the translation system struggled to process. And underneath the music, there were other sounds. Laughter, conversation, the casual noise of daily life continuing as if this was just an ordinary place to live. Stared at the speakers as the sounds washed over him. Beside him, had tears forming in her large eyes. Even seemed affected, his hard expression softening into something like wonder. They are not just surviving down there, said quietly. They are living, truly living. He turned to face his crew, and for the first time since the mission began, he allowed himself to smile. Prepare the landing craft. It is time to meet our neighbors. Through the viewport, the blue and green planet waited for them, hiding its horrors beneath clouds and sunlight. And somewhere on its surface, humans went about their day, completely unaware that the galaxy was about to come knocking on their door. The landing craft touched down in a field of tall grass that swayed in the wind like waves on an ocean. Ambassador stepped out first, his environmental suit humming as it worked to protect him from the deadly atmosphere. The weight of the planet pressed down on him immediately, making every step feel like walking through thick mud. The gravity is worse than I expected, Commander grunted behind him. The military officer was struggling to carry his equipment, his powerful reptilian muscles straining against the invisible force that pulled at everything on this world. Scholar moved slowly and carefully, her small body having the hardest time of all. My suit says the external temperature is 22 degrees. The air pressure is crushing. I do not understand how anything can move freely in these conditions. They had landed near one of the settlements their sensors had detected, a place the humans apparently called Haven Ridge. Smoke rose from chimneys in the distance, and they could see structures made of wood and stone arranged along dirt roads. It looked primitive compared to galactic standards, but there was something warm and inviting about the scene. Was about to suggest they start walking toward the town when movement caught his attention. Something was approaching through the tall grass, moving fast. Immediately raised his weapon, his training taking over. Contact approaching from the east, the commander announced. Single target, moving at incredible speed. The grass parted and a creature emerged onto the path in front of them. No, not a creature. A human. He sat atop a four-legged animal that breathed heavily from the run, its hooves pawing at the ground. The human himself was tall and broad, with sun-darkened skin and hair the color of wheat. He wore simple clothing made of fabric and leather with no environmental protection of any kind. Felt his heart stop. The human was breathing the toxic air. The human was sitting casually in the crushing gravity. The human looked completely comfortable on this world that should have killed him instantly. Well now, the human said, his voice carrying easily across the distance. We do not get many visitors out here. You folks lost or something. Kept his weapon raised. Stay back, we are armed. The human looked at the weapon with mild curiosity, like someone examining an interesting rock. I can see that. Mind pointing that somewhere else? You are making Dusty nervous. He patted the animal beneath him, which did seem agitated by the armed aliens. Stepped forward and gently pushed his weapon down. Forgive my companion. We mean no harm. I am ambassador of the people. We have come from the Galactic Council to make contact with your species. The human's eyebrows rose in surprise. The Galactic Council? Now there is a name I have not heard in a long time. My grandfather used to tell stories about them. He swung down from his animal and landed on the ground with a heavy thud that would have shattered its bones. Name is Chris Vega. I scout and hunt for Haven Ridge. You want to talk to someone important, you will need to see Danny. He sort of runs things around here. "We would appreciate an escort to your settlement," said carefully. Chris shrugged. "Sure thing, it is about an hour's walk from here. Hope you folks can handle the trip." He started walking, leading his animal by a rope attached to its head. The three aliens followed as best they could, their suits working overtime to keep them alive and mobile. Fell behind almost immediately, her short legs unable to match the pace that Chris set without any apparent effort. The journey was terrifying. First, the sky darkened without warning, and brilliant flashes of light split the air, followed by deafening roars of sound. Threw himself to the ground, certain they were under attack. Chris just glanced up at the clouds and said, "Storm is coming. We should pick up the pace." "What was that light?" demanded, his weapon out again. "Lightning," Chris answered, as if that explained everything. "Electricity from the clouds. It hits the ground sometimes, kills a few people every year if they are unlucky." The aliens stared at him in horror. Electricity falling from the sky was apparently just a normal part of life on this world. Later, they encountered a pack of gray four-legged predators with sharp teeth and hungry eyes. The animals emerged from the grass and circled the group, growling low in their throats. Soot began flashing warnings about dangerous fauna. Chris stepped forward and shouted at the predators, just shouted with nothing but his voice. "Get out of here, go on." The predators hesitated, then turned and ran. Chris turned back to the aliens with a confused expression. "Wolves. They usually stay away from people, but they must have smelled you three. Your suits leak some kind of chemical or something." "You drove them away with your voice," whispered. "Well, yeah, they are just wolves. Nothing to worry about unless you are alone and injured." They continued on. The storm hit before they reached town, and water began falling from the sky in sheets. The alien suits protected them from the liquid, but they watched in amazement as Chris simply walked through it, letting the water soak his clothing and skin. He even opened his mouth and drank some of it. "Is the water not toxic?" asked. Chris laughed. It was a warm sound full of genuine amusement. "It is just rain, clean water from the clouds, best drinking there is." Haven Ridge appeared through the rain, a collection of buildings huddled together against the storm. Lights glowed in windows, and smoke still rose from chimneys despite the weather. People moved between buildings, running through the rain or walking with large fabric shields held over their heads. A man stood waiting for them at the edge of town. He was older than Chris, with gray in his dark hair and lines on his face that spoke of years spent working under the harsh sun. His eyes were kind but sharp, taking in every detail of the aliens and their equipment. "Danny," Chris called out, "brought some visitors. They say they are from the Galactic Council." Danny Carter nodded slowly and approached the group. He moved with the easy confidence of someone completely at home in his environment, someone who had never known anything other than this deadly world. "Welcome to Haven Ridge," he said. "You all look like you have had a rough trip. Come inside. We have food and warm fires." "We appreciate your hospitality," replied. "We have many questions for your people." Danny smiled, and there was something ancient in that expression. "I imagine you do. Folks from the council never did understand us much." He gestured toward a large building in the center of town. "Come on, let us get you dried off and fed, then we can talk." As they walked into town, worked up the courage to ask the question that had been burning in her mind since they landed. "How long have your people lived on this world?" Danny considered the question for a moment. "My family has been in this valley for 9 generations, but humans have been on Earth for a lot longer than that. Hundreds of thousands of years, if the old records are right." The aliens stopped walking. Hundreds of thousands of years. This species had not just survived on a Class 15. They had evolved here. They had been shaped by this place, molded by its dangers into something that could thrive where nothing else could. Danny looked back at them with that same warm smile. "I know it must seem strange to you, but this is our home, the only one we have ever known." He continued toward the building, leaving the aliens standing in the rain. Their understanding of the universe forever changed. 3 days had passed since the aliens arrived in Haven Ridge, and each day brought new revelations that shattered everything they thought they knew about survival. Ambassador kept detailed notes, filling page after page with observations that would have seemed like fantasy back on his. The humans had given them a small building to stay in, with beds that were too firm and air that was too thick, but somehow still welcoming. The people of Haven Ridge treated them as honored guests. bringing food and checking on their comfort despite the fact that they could not remove their environmental suits even for a moment. On the morning of the third day, a woman named Maya Collins came to visit them. She was the town's doctor, a title that apparently meant she was responsible for treating injuries and illness among the human population. She had kind eyes and steady hands, and she spoke with the patience of someone used to explaining difficult things. "I thought you might want to see our medical facility," she offered. Scholar mentioned she was interested in human biology. Practically jumped at the opportunity. The small scientist had been desperate to understand how humans functioned on this impossible world, and a chance to examine their medical knowledge was exactly what she needed. The medical building was simple but clean. Beds lined the walls, and cabinets held various tools and medicines. Maya walked them through the space, explaining how humans dealt with the countless dangers of their environment. "Our immune systems are remarkable," she said, holding up a small vial of clear liquid. "This is a vaccine. It teaches our bodies to fight off specific diseases before we ever encounter them. But even without vaccines, human bodies can adapt to most microbial threats within a few days. We get sick, we fight it off, and we become stronger." Scanned the vial with her equipment, and her eyes went wide. "The microbial threats on this planet should be lethal to any carbon-based life. How can your bodies possibly fight them?" Maya shrugged as if this was the most natural thing in the world. "Our immune systems have been fighting Earth's microbes for millions of years. We evolved together. The bacteria and viruses that live here are dangerous, yes, but our bodies know how to handle them." She showed them other things too. Human bones that could heal themselves after breaking. Skin that could repair cuts and wounds within days. A cardiovascular system that could adapt to extreme temperatures, high altitudes, and physical stress that would kill most galactic species instantly. "We are endurance hunters," Maya explained. "Our ancestors used to chase prey across the plains for hours, sometimes days, until the animal simply collapsed from exhaustion. We do not have claws or fangs or venom. We survive by outlasting everything else." Later that day, a young man named Sam Brooks took them to see the settlement's technology center. Sam was an engineer, responsible for keeping the machines and systems of Haven Ridge running. He was enthusiastic and talked quickly, clearly excited to show off his work. "Most of what we use is pretty basic by galactic standards," he admitted, gesturing to the workshop filled with tools and half-finished projects. "We lost a lot of knowledge when our ancestors left the council, but we have been rebuilding, figuring things out on our own." Commander examined a piece of equipment that appeared to be a simple communication device. "This is primitive technology. How do you defend yourselves against the planet's threats with such limited resources?" Sam laughed. "We do not really defend against the planet, we work with it. The seasons, the weather, the animals, they are all part of a system. Once you understand the system, you can find your place in it." He showed them how the settlement used the local rivers for power, how they had developed farming techniques that took advantage of the violent weather patterns instead of fighting against them. It was not the advanced technology the aliens were used to, but there was a wisdom in it that impressed even. In the afternoon, Lisa Grant, Danny's wife, took them to the agricultural fields outside town. She was a strong woman with dirt under her fingernails and a practical way of speaking that reminded of farmers he had known on a dozen different worlds. "The soil here is rich," she explained, running her fingers through the dark earth. "All the death and decay feeds new life. Plants grow fast on Earth if you know how to help them along." The fields stretched out in neat rows, filled with crops that the aliens did not recognize. Workers moved between the plants, pulling weeds and checking for pests. Children ran along the edges, playing games and occasionally helping with small tasks. "Your young are exposed to this environment from birth?" asked, watching a small human child chase another through the tall grass. Lisa nodded. "Of course, they have to be. This is the world they were born into. The sooner they learn to live in it, the better." As they watched the children play, a distant roar echoed across the fields. Everyone stopped and turned toward the sound. At the edge of the forest, a massive creature emerged from the trees. It stood on 4 legs and had a body covered in thick fur, with claws the length of its forearm and teeth designed for tearing flesh. The aliens froze in terror. Their suits immediately began flashing warnings about the predator's size, speed, and estimated lethality. But the humans did not run. Danny Carter, who had been working nearby, simply picked up a metal tool from the ground and walked toward the creature. His pace was calm and steady, without any sign of fear. "Danny, no," called out. "That creature will kill you." Danny did not answer. He kept walking until he was only a few meters from the beast. Then he stopped, planted his feet, and shouted at it. The sound that came from his chest was loud enough to make the aliens flinch, a roar of challenge that seemed impossible from such a small body compared to the massive predator. The creature hesitated. It snarled and swiped at the air with one massive paw, but it did not advance. Danny held his ground, the metal tool raised, his eyes locked on the animal's eyes. For a long moment, neither moved. Then the creature turned and retreated into the forest. Danny walked back to the group, breathing a little harder than before. There were scratches on his arm from where the creature's claws had grazed him, and blood was already seeping through his torn shirt. "You are injured," exclaimed. Danny looked down at his arm as if noticing the wound for the first time. It is nothing. Maya will stitch it up later," barely broke the skin. Stared at the human with something new in his eyes. Not fear exactly, but a deep and profound respect. "That creature was twice your size. It could have killed you in seconds." "Maybe," Danny admitted, "but it did not want to fight. It was just testing boundaries, seeing if we were easy prey. Once it realized we were not, it left." He wiped the blood from his arm with his shirt. "That is how it works on Earth. Everything is always testing everything else. You just have to show that you are not worth the trouble." That night, as the aliens sat in their quarters discussing the day's events, a new sound began outside. The wind picked up, howling through the streets of Haven Ridge. The sky darkened even though it was not yet evening, and the air grew heavy with pressure. Lisa knocked on their door with a worried expression. "Big storm coming, probably the worst we have seen this season. You should come to the shelter with us." "How bad?" asked. Lisa's answer chilled him to his core. "Bad enough that we do not take chances." As they followed her through the streets, the wind grew stronger and the sky turned green. Lightning flashed constantly now, and the thunder was so loud it shook the ground beneath their feet. The humans moved quickly but without panic, gathering children and supplies and heading for a reinforced building in the center of town. Danny stood at the door, counting heads and directing people inside. "Everyone is accounted for," he announced as the last of the townspeople entered. "Seal the doors." The aliens huddled in a corner of the shelter, watching as the humans settled in around them. Outside, the storm hit with a fury that made their sensors go blank from overload. And somehow, impossibly, the humans began to relax. Someone pulled out cards and started a game. Others told stories or sang songs. Children curled up against their parents and fell asleep. Danny sat down next to and offered him a cup of warm liquid. "Drink this, it will help with the stress." "How can you be so calm?" asked, his voice barely audible over the roaring wind outside. Danny looked around at his people, his family, his community. "Because we have weathered storms like this before, thousands of times, millions of times going back through all the generations. This is just part of life on Earth." He took a sip from his own cup and smiled. "It will pass. It always does, and when it is over, we will rebuild whatever needs rebuilding and keep going. That is what humans do." Outside, the Class 15 raged against the tiny shelter and the fragile beings inside. But the humans just kept playing cards, telling stories, and waiting for the dawn. The storm raged for 2 full days. Inside the shelter, the aliens watched in amazement as the humans simply continued living their lives. They ate meals together, told stories, and even held lessons for the children who could not attend regular school. The walls shook with every thunderclap, and the howling wind sounded like a living creature trying to claw its way inside, but no one seemed frightened. On the second night, when most of the town had fallen asleep in their makeshift beds, Ambassador found Danny Carter sitting alone near one of the small windows. The human was staring out at the chaos beyond the glass, his expression thoughtful and distant. "May I join you?" asked. Danny nodded without looking away from the window. "Cannot sleep either. My species requires less rest than yours, and I find myself with many questions." "I figured you would." Danny finally turned to face the ambassador. "You want to know why we left?" Settled onto a nearby bench, his suit creaking with the movement. "The galactic records say very little about the human departure, only that you from all council territories and disappeared. Many assumed you had died out." Danny laughed quietly, but there was no humor in it. Died out. That is what they hoped would happen, I think, or at least that is what some of them hoped. He was silent for a long moment, gathering his thoughts. When he spoke again, his voice was heavy with old pain. "My great-great-grandmother was alive when humans were still part of the galactic community. She told my grandmother stories, and my grandmother told my mother, and my mother told me. That is how we keep our history alive now." "What did she say?" "She said that when humans first reached the stars, we were excited. There was so much to see, so many species to meet. We thought we were joining a community of equals." Danny shook his head slowly. "We were wrong." He stood up and began packing, his footsteps soft on the shelter floor. "The other species were afraid of us from the beginning. We were too strong, too aggressive, too unpredictable. We could survive in environments that killed everyone else. We ate foods that were toxic to most galactic life. We healed from injuries that would be fatal to any other species." "The Council saw you as a threat," said. "Not just a threat, a monster." Danny stopped packing and looked directly at the ambassador. "They passed laws restricting where we could go and what we could do. They banned us from certain planets because our presence might damage the ecosystem. They limited our technology because they were afraid of what we might do with it." Felt shame wash over him. He had read the old records, but they had been written by the Council itself. They spoke of reasonable precautions and necessary limitations. They did not mention fear or prejudice. "We tried to prove ourselves," Danny continued. "We followed every law, accepted every restriction. We thought that if we just showed them who we really were, they would accept us eventually." His voice hardened. "They never did. No matter how peaceful we were, no matter how hard we tried to fit in, they always looked at us and saw monsters." "So you left." "So we left." Danny sat back down, suddenly looking very tired. "We gathered everyone we could find and came home, back to Earth, back to the one place in the universe that was truly ours. The Council was happy to let us go. They thought we would die here on this that they could not imagine surviving, but we did not die. We lived, we grew, we remembered." The storm seemed to quiet slightly, as if the planet itself was listening to the conversation. "And now you are back," Danny said, looking at. "After 300 years of silence, the Galactic Council sends an ambassador to our door. Why?" Chose his words carefully. "Your settlements appeared on our sensors. The Council was curious how any species could survive on a Class 15 world. When we realized it was humans, we had to investigate. Curious, not concerned for our welfare, just curious about how the monsters were still alive." "I will not lie to you," replied. "There are members of the Council who still fear your species. When I return with my report, some will argue for quarantine, others will push for more drastic measures." Danny's eyes narrowed. "And what will you argue for?" "I will argue for what I have seen. A species that has every reason to hate the galaxy, yet welcomed strangers into their home. A people who have survived impossible conditions through strength and cooperation. A community that protects each other and lives in harmony with a world that should have destroyed them." He stood and faced Danny directly. "I will argue that humans deserve a second chance, that the galaxy needs to see you not as monsters, but as what you truly are." "And what are we truly?" "Survivors, protectors, the children of a world that tested you in ways no other species can imagine and made you stronger for it." The storm finally began to weaken on the morning of the third day. Sunlight broke through the clouds, and the people of Haven Ridge emerged from their shelter to assess the damage. Some buildings had lost roofs, some trees had fallen, but the town still stood and no one had been seriously hurt. Worked with the communications team to establish a link with his ship in orbit, and through the ship, a connection to the Galactic Council. High Chancellor's face appeared on the screen, his expression a mixture of relief and concern. "Ambassador, we feared the worst when we lost contact during the storm. The humans sheltered us," reported. "They kept us safe through conditions that our equipment could not withstand. I have much to tell you, Chancellor, but first there is someone who wishes to speak with the Council directly." He stepped aside, and Maya Collins took his place in front of the camera. The human doctor looked calm and composed, her voice steady as she addressed the most powerful political body in the galaxy. "My name is Maya Collins. I am a healer in the human settlement of Haven Ridge. I speak for my people when I say that we have not forgotten what the Council did to us 300 years ago. We remember the fear, the restrictions, the way we were treated as monsters simply for being different. His expression remained neutral but could see the tension in his posture. The Council's actions in the past may have been misguided. They were cruel, Maya corrected gently. But cruelty born from fear is still cruelty. The question now is whether the galaxy is ready to move past that fear. What do you propose? Maya glanced at Danny, who stood nearby with his arms crossed. He gave her a small nod of encouragement. We do not want conquest, she said, turning back to the screen. We never did. What we want is what we wanted from the beginning. Connection, trade, friendship. The chance to be part of something larger than ourselves without having to hide who we are. Was silent for a long moment. Behind him, could see other council members gathering, drawn by the unprecedented transmission from a world they had written off centuries ago. The council will need to discuss this matter thoroughly, finally said. There are many concerns that must be addressed, many old wounds that must be healed. We understand, Maya replied. We have waited 300 years, we can wait a little longer. I will propose sending a formal diplomatic delegation to your world. A chance for both sides to meet properly and begin the process of reconciliation. Maya smiled, and there was hope in her eyes that suspected had been absent for a very long time. We would welcome that, Chancellor. Our door has always been open. It just took the galaxy a while to knock. The transmission ended, and the room fell silent. Danny walked over to stand beside Maya, putting a hand on her shoulder. You did good, he said quietly. We all did, she looked at. Thank you, Ambassador, for giving us this chance. Bowed his head in respect. The chance was always yours, I simply helped the Council see it. That evening, as the sun set over Haven Ridge, and the people celebrated surviving another storm, Danny found standing at the edge of town, looking up at the stars that were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Do you think they are ready for us? Danny asked. The galaxy, I mean. Consider the question carefully. I do not know, he admitted. Change is difficult and fear takes a long time to overcome. There will be resistance. There will be those who still see your species as a threat. He turned to face the human leader. But I believe it is time to try. The galaxy has been incomplete without humanity. Perhaps it is time for that to change. Danny nodded slowly, still watching the stars. Then I guess we will find out together what kind of neighbors we can be. Above them, the first lights of the orbiting ships blinked against the night sky, waiting to carry news of humanity's return to every corner of the galaxy. 6 weeks passed before the formal diplomatic delegation arrived. In that time, the people of Haven Ridge prepared their small town for visitors in ways they never had before. Buildings were repaired and painted. The main road was smoothed and widened. A landing area was cleared in the field where team had first touched down, marked with stones arranged in patterns that the ships could see from orbit. But not everyone in town was happy about the changes. Chris Vega stood at the edge of the landing field on the morning the delegation was scheduled to arrive, his arms crossed and his expression troubled. Danny found him there, just as he had expected. Still think this is a mistake? Danny asked, coming to stand beside the younger man. Chris did not answer immediately. He stared up at the sky, watching the distant glint of ships moving into position above the clouds. My grandfather died never forgiving the Council for what they did to us. His grandfather felt the same way. We spent 300 years learning to survive without them, learning to be proud of who we are without needing their approval. And you think letting them back in betrays all that? I think we are setting ourselves up to be hurt again. Chris finally turned to look at Danny. What happens when they see how strong we really are and get scared all over again? What happens when some politician decides that humans are too dangerous to be allowed off Earth? Danny thought about this for a long time before answering. Maybe that will happen. Maybe everything will fall apart and we will be right back where we started, but maybe it will not. Maybe this time will be different. He put a hand on Chris's shoulder. My daughter asked me last week what aliens were like. She wanted to know if she would ever get to meet one, ever get to see the stars herself. I did not know what to tell her. Chris's expression softened slightly at the mention of Danny's daughter. The whole town had watched her grow up, and everyone knew how much Danny loved her. These kids deserve a chance to choose their own future, Danny continued. If we close the door now, we make that choice for them. We tell them that fear and anger are more important than hope. I do not want that for my daughter. I do not think you want it for your children either when you have them someday." Chris was quiet for a moment, then he sighed and shook his head. "You always know what to say." "I have been practicing that speech for weeks," Danny admitted with a small smile. "I was not sure I believed it myself until just now." The first ship broke through the clouds an hour later. It was larger than Svessel had been, designed to carry dozens of passengers and crew. It descended slowly, carefully, and touched down in the marked landing area with a gentleness that spoke of expensive technology and experienced pilots. The people of Haven Ridge gathered to watch as the ship's doors opened. Ambassador emerged first, followed by Scholar and Commander. Behind them came representatives from 12 different species, each one wearing environmental protection suited to their biology. And at the head of the delegation, walking with the careful dignity of a being who knew the weight of history rested on his shoulders, came High Chancellor himself. Danny stepped forward to meet them, flanked by Maya and Lisa. The two groups faced each other in the center of the landing field, watched by humans on one side and aliens on the other. "High Chancellor," Danny said, bowing his head slightly in respect. "Welcome to Earth." Returned the gesture. "Thank you for receiving us, Leader Carter. I must admit, I was not certain this day would ever come." "Neither were we." The formal introductions took most of the morning. Species names were exchanged, titles were acknowledged, and careful diplomatic phrases were spoken. Had coached Danny on proper council protocol, but the human leader added his own warmth to the proceedings, making each delegate feel genuinely welcome despite the circumstances. By midday, the delegation had been given a tour of the main settlement. They had seen the farms, the medical building, the workshop where Sam Brooks proudly showed off human engineering. They had eaten human food, prepared carefully to be safe for alien biologies, and drunk water from the local spring. Through it all, watched and listened, and said very little. Knew the High Chancellor was observing everything, cataloging details, forming judgments that would shape the future of human-galactic relations for generations to come. The incident happened in the afternoon. One of the diplomats had brought his daughter on the trip, a young girl named Thessaly who had begged to see the legendary for herself. She was small even by standards, with bright eyes and boundless curiosity that her father's warnings could not contain. While the adults were discussing trade agreements in the town hall, Thessaly slipped away to explore. She wandered past the edge of town and into the tall grass beyond, chasing a colorful insect that had caught her attention. She did not notice the predator stalking her until it was almost too late. The creature was one of the great cats that roamed the wilderness around Haven Ridge. It was smaller than the beast Danny had faced weeks earlier, but still easily large enough to kill a child. It crept through the grass on silent paws, its eyes fixed on the small figure that had wandered into its territory. Danny noticed Thessaly's absence before anyone else. He was scanning the crowd during a pause in the negotiations when he realized the girl was missing. His eyes swept the area and found her in the grass beyond the town limits. He also saw the predator. There was no time to call for help, no time to explain what he had seen. Danny simply moved, running faster than any of the aliens had seen him move before. He covered the distance to Thessaly in seconds, putting himself between her and the cat just as it prepared to pounce. The predator hesitated, confused by this new obstacle. Danny spread his arms wide, making himself look as large as possible, and released a roar of challenge that echoed across the fields. For a moment, the outcome was uncertain. The cat snarled and swiped at Danny, its claws catching his arm and drawing blood. But Danny did not back down. He held his ground, shielding the terrified child behind him, and stared into the predator's eyes with absolute defiance. The cat blinked first. It turned and ran, disappearing into the forest as quickly as it had appeared. Danny scooped Thessaly into his arms and carried her back to the town. The girl was crying, her small body shaking with fear, but she was completely unharmed. Her father rushed to meet them, his eyes wide with terror and relief. "She is safe," Danny said, handing the child to her father. "Just scared, the cat did not touch her." The diplomat clutched his daughter tightly, unable to speak. Tears ran down his scaled face as he looked at the human who had risked his life to save a stranger's child. High Chancellor approached slowly. His 4 eyes studied Danny with an intensity that made the human uncomfortable. Blood was still dripping from Danny's wounded arm, staining his shirt and the ground beneath him. "You are injured," observed. Danny glanced at his arm. "It is nothing serious." "That creature could have killed you." "It could have killed her too." Danny shrugged as if the answer was obvious. "She is just a child. I could not let that happen." Was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, softer, less formal. 300 years ago, the Council looked at your species and saw monsters, dangerous predators that needed to be contained for the safety of the galaxy. He reached out and placed one of his large hands on Danny's uninjured shoulder. "I see now that we were wrong. We looked at your strength and saw a threat. We should have looked at your hearts instead." He turned to address the gathered crowd, both human and alien. "I have seen today what humans truly are. Not monsters, not threats, protectors, guardians, a species shaped by hardship into something remarkable." His voice rose, carrying across the field. "I will recommend to the Council that Earth be recognized as a sovereign human. I will propose full diplomatic relations, trade agreements, and an open invitation for humans to return to the galactic community as equals." A cheer rose from the humans in the crowd. Some of the aliens looked surprised, others concerned, but many were nodding in agreement. Smiled quietly, knowing that the galaxy was about to change forever. That evening, as the sun set over Haven Ridge, the formal treaty was signed. Humans and aliens stood together, watching as Danny Carter and High Chancellor placed their marks on a document that would shape the future of both peoples. Afterward, as the celebration began, Sam Brooks found Danny standing apart from the crowd. The young engineer had a drink in each hand and offered one to his leader. "So what happens now?" Sam asked. Danny took the drink and looked up at the stars. Ships from a dozen worlds floated among them now, waiting to carry news of humanity's return to every corner of the galaxy. "Now we find out what kind of neighbors we can be," he said. Behind them, in the fields of Haven Ridge, children from both species were playing together. Human kids showed youngsters how to catch fireflies, while children demonstrated glowing toys from there. Laughter rose from the group, mixing human voices with alien ones in a sound that had not been heard for 300 years. The Class 15 turned slowly beneath the stars, its inhabitants looking up at a universe that finally saw them clearly. Not as monsters, not as threats, just as neighbors ready to begin again.